My name is Rina Cole, and I am 31 years old, and I want to tell you about the Sunday afternoon 2 years ago when my grandmother called me to her kitchen and changed my life without either of us making a single dramatic gesture about it. But before I tell you about that Sunday, I need to tell you about my family, because the Sunday only makes full sense once you understand the shape of what came before it. I grew up in a household with a clear and unspoken hierarchy. My sister Maya was 3 years older than me and was, from my earliest memory, the child my parents had organized their hopes and their warmth around. She was louder than me, more charming, better at the particular performance of neediness that produces attention in families where attention is given to whoever asks for it most consistently. I was not a demanding child. I was the kind of child who finished her homework without being reminded and made her bed every morning and did not require much and was rewarded for not requiring much by being required even less of in return. My parents called me independent. My teachers called me mature. My grandmother called me something different. She called me the one who sees. She said it to me when I was 12, and I did not fully understand it then, and I have thought about it many times since. I am going to tell you what she meant by it. She meant that I paid attention, that I watched how things worked and remembered what I saw and filed it somewhere useful, and did not perform feelings I did not have or pretend not to have feelings I did. My grandmother valued that. She valued it the way people value things that are rare. Before I tell you what she did with that valuing, please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city in the comments. I love knowing where you are. Now, let me take you back to her kitchen table. My grandmother's name was Dorothy Cole, and she was 78 years old when she called me to her house on a Sunday in September, 2 years before she died. She called me specifically, not my parents, not Maya, me, with a phone call on a Saturday evening that said simply, "Rina, can you come for lunch tomorrow? I want to talk to you about something." I drove to her house the next morning. She had made the lunch she always made when she wanted a conversation to feel ordinary: roast chicken, the vegetables she grew herself in the back garden, the specific apple crumble that meant she had been planning the meal for at least 2 days. We ate, and we talked about the things we always talked about: her garden and my work, and a book she had been reading. And I noticed that she was in the particular focused mode she entered when she had something to say and was deciding on the right moment to say it. After the crumble, she made tea, and she sat across from me at the kitchen table, and she put an envelope between us. She said, "I want to talk to you about money." I said, "Okay." She said, "I have been thinking for a long time about what I want to do with what I have saved, and I have made a decision. And I want to tell you directly because I think you deserve to hear it directly and not find out later through other people." I said, "Grandma, you do not have to give me anything." She said, "I know I do not have to." She said, "That is not the point." She said, "The point is that I want to." She slid the envelope across the table. I opened it. Inside was a piece of paper with a number written on it and a bank transfer confirmation dated that morning. The number was significant. Not a fortune by some measures, everything by mine. She said, "I have given you this now because I want to see what you do with it, and because I do not trust that it will reach you if I wait." I want to be precise about that last sentence because it is the sentence that explains everything else. I do not trust that it will reach you if I wait. My grandmother did not elaborate on it that Sunday. She said it clearly and without drama and moved on to talking about the apple crumble recipe and whether I was getting enough sleep and the book she had been reading. But I held the sentence. I filed it in the same place I filed everything important, and I thought about what it meant. She knew something about the plan, not specifically, not in detail, but in the way that women who have been watching a family for decades know things without being told them explicitly. She knew that if the money passed through the estate, through the formal process, through my parents as intermediaries, it might not arrive at the destination she intended. She did not say this out loud. She did not need to. I understood her, and she knew I understood her, and that was the end of the conversation about it. I used the money. I want to tell you what I did with it because it is part of the story and because my grandmother asked me to tell her, and I want to honor that. I put 40% into a deposit on a flat, a one-bedroom in a part of the city I had been watching for 3 years because the prices were moving in a direction I had calculated. I put 30% into an investment account I had been researching for 18 months. I put 20% into a business course and the early costs of a small consultancy I had been building on the side of my regular job for 2 years. I kept 10% as an emergency fund in a high-interest savings account. I told my grandmother what I had done at Christmas that year. She listened to every detail. When I finished, she said, "Yes, that is exactly right." She said it the way she said things that confirmed something she had already known. She died 14 months later. She died knowing the money was where she had put it, in the hands of the one who sees. My parents called me on a Thursday evening 3 weeks after the funeral. My mother's voice had the particular quality it gets when she has organized something and is presenting it as a conversation rather than a delivery of information. She said, "Your father and I have been talking about Grandma's estate." I said, "Okay." She said, "We have been looking at what she left and thinking about what makes the most sense for the family." I said, "What have you decided?" She said, "We think the bulk of the liquid assets should go to Maya." I said, "Tell me the reasoning." My mother said, "Maya is at a difficult point in her life. She has the children and the situation with the house, and she has been struggling, and we think this is the moment where some support could really make a difference." She said, "You are doing well, Rina. You have your job and your flat, and you have always managed." She said, "We think you understand." I sat with that for a moment. You have always managed. The sentence that had followed me my entire life, the summary of everything my family had decided about me, the reason I had never been the one resources were directed toward, because I had always managed, which meant managing had been its own punishment. I said, "I understand completely, Mum." She said, "We knew you would." I said, "Can I ask you something?" She said, "Of course." I said, "What do you think Grandma had in her account when she died?" My mother said the number. It was significantly lower than she expected. I could hear it in the pause before she said it, the slight recalibration of someone whose mental arithmetic was not producing the result they had planned around. I said, "That is because she gave a significant portion of it away before she died." My mother said, "What?" I said, "She gave it to me, directly, 2 years ago, at her kitchen table on a Sunday in September." My mother said nothing for 4 seconds. I counted. Then she said, "Rina." I said, "I have the bank transfer confirmation." I said, "She told me she did not trust it would reach me if she waited." I let that land. I did not add anything to it. I let it sit in the silence between us and do its work. What followed that phone call was a week of conversations that I want to describe accurately because the accurate version is more useful than the dramatic one. My mother called back the same evening. Her voice had shifted from the organized delivery tone to something raw, the voice of a woman whose plan had encountered information it had not accounted for. She said, "Why did she give it to you and not to all of us equally?" I said, "You would have to ask her that." She said, "Rina, that is not a real answer." I said, "Mum, it is the only answer I have. She gave it to me directly, with a bank transfer and a note, 2 years before she died. Whatever she was thinking when she made that decision was her own, and she did not share all of it with me." I said, "What I can tell you is that she told me she wanted to see what I did with it." I said, "I used it to buy a flat, invest for the future, and start a business." I said, "The business made its first profit last quarter." My mother was quiet for a long moment. Then my father got on the line. He said, "Rina, we are not questioning that she gave it to you." He said, "We are just trying to understand." I said, "I know." I said, "Dad, Grandma watched this family for 78 years. She made a decision with her own money that she was completely entitled to make."
I said, "The question I would sit with, if I were you, is not why she gave it to me, it is why she felt she had to do it directly and in secret 2 years before she died, instead of trusting that it would reach me through the normal process." He did not answer that. He did not need to. Maya called me on the Saturday. She was upset in the specific way of someone who has had something they thought was guaranteed removed from their expectations. She said, "I cannot believe you knew and said nothing." I said, "Grandma asked me to keep it private until it was relevant." She said, "And you just did what she asked?" I said, "She was the person who loved me most clearly my entire life. Yes, I did what she asked." The conversation ended there. The estate settled the following month. What was left was divided according to the will, which was modest and equal. The significant portion was already where my grandmother had put it: in the flat I owned, in the investment account growing quietly, in the business I was building, in the hands of the one who sees. That's my story. If it stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop your city in the comments. Hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.